Yeah, just whilst we're waiting for people to come in, I guess we'll just do our hellos and introductions. So, hi everyone, my name is Vanessa. I'm based at CodeBase in Aberdeen. So, for those who are not familiar, CodeBase are a tech cluster and they work with startups all over the UK. We have 3 locations, one in Edinburgh, Stirling, and Aberdeen. And yeah, basically CodeBase on the Couch has been a series of talks and webinars that we've done since the beginning of kind of this working from home movement, kind of designed to kind of keep the community connected and together, and possibly to hear from speakers that they would normally have had to travel 3-4 hours to go and see. So it's been a really great way to kind of explore new topics and things that we might not have been able to do in kind of in an event environment. So before we get started, there is a chat and a Q&A box at the bottom. There will be an opportunity for Q&As at the end, but if you think of anything kind of during the presentation that you want to ask, then feel free to pop it down below and we'll get around to that. So yeah, welcome to Daisy from Zebras Unite. So what I'll do is I'll just pass over to Daisy to introduce herself, and yeah, we'll get the presentation going.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me, Vanessa, and thank you to everybody who's tuning in this morning. So I'm going to start off with a little bit about me so you understand why I'm going to talk about what I'm going to talk about. So when I started off my career, I went into politics because I wanted to change the world, as you do. Now, obviously, that was a terrible idea. So I quickly left that and I ended up joining a mission-led startup. Not that I had the vocabulary for what that was at the time, but I did everything from planting trees to pitching clients, and I completely fell in love with entrepreneurship as a way to change the world. So I went off and did a master's degree in business with a focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. And what that led me to understand was if I really wanted to make a difference, I needed to understand the money. So I joined a Big 4 firm and I trained as an accountant. And then after I qualified, I joined the Scottish Investment Bank, which, if you don't know, is a public body which co-invests into high growth companies in Scotland alongside private investors. And after that, I wanted to see if we could use investment in a way to do more good directly. So I joined a social investment fund. And now I invest in social enterprises working in areas of multiple deprivation in Scotland. And what became clear to me was the gap between those two types of investing that is just unsustainable. And so that's what led me to Zebras Unite, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. And the essence of the message is really that we are typically presented with a very homogenous, very privileged idea about what it is to build and fund startups. And it doesn't have to be like that. If you feel that you don't fit that mold, you're certainly not alone. There's a whole movement of folks out there who are building a new type of culture, new types of capital to power sustainable, purposeful, inclusive, innovative businesses. Okay, so to get that started, before I talk about zebras, I'm actually going to have to talk about unicorns because that's where our story starts. So what's a unicorn? It's a company with $1 billion valuation. And the phrase was coined by Aileen Lee at Cowboy Ventures. And it's significant that it was coined by a venture capitalist because the concept is important to venture capitalists, more so necessarily than founders. Why do venture capitalists like unicorns? Well, because of the way that venture fund maths works. So let's look at that a little bit. So venture capital is big money, takes big risks on startups. Venture capital firm raises a fund, looks to invest it fairly rapidly into growing startups and try to grow those companies absolutely as big as possible and then sell them over the life of the fund, say 7 to 10 years. Now, because startups are hard, you don't know if it's going to work out, and a lot of times it doesn't. A venture capital fund absolutely expects that most of those companies will fall over, but they can offset this by producing even just one with outsized returns. So this graph here shows you what a typical successful venture fund might look like. And those $1 billion returns, that big one on the right there, That is typically an IPO, floating on the public markets, or a massive acquisition to return those funds. Now, many funds don't even actually produce an average like this across the fund and return the promised returns to investors. But this logic does absolutely make sense. I mean, you can see how it works. Sorry, just trying to move along. Because investment startups in very large markets require a large upfront investment to build something before they can start making any money. But this structure, you can see, it only allows for really two outcomes. Companies are driven to become a unicorn, and either they do or they die. And we can see the results of this focus on growth at all costs in the type of unicorn behavior that we see. We see misinformation, compromised data privacy and security, toxic workplaces, and undermining employee rights. Because the success is measured in the valuation, not necessarily in value created for the world. But not just that, you have to realize that valuation through an exit. And all of this on the timescale that the VC has to make returns to their investors. So this is the approach that Silicon Valley is known for. So this is what built Uber and Facebook and Amazon and all the unicorns that you might have heard of. But companies that don't identify a billion-dollar opportunity, or who don't want to aim for an exit in the next few years, or who want to focus on anything other than growth, really, well, venture capital isn't for you. And not only do a lot of founders not necessarily want to take this approach, a lot of them don't know if they do. They don't know if it's right for their market or for their company when they're at the point where they want to seek investment to grow. But if you do take it, then you're on the conveyor belt and there aren't many ways off. And worse still, even if you do identify with all of these criteria and you seek venture capital, you might not be able to get it. Because the people making these investment decisions, trying to pick winners from a bunch of early stage companies, they are overwhelmingly of a privileged demographic. And when they're trying to envision what success looks like, consciously or unconsciously, it looks a lot like they do. It went to the same universities they did. It lives where they live. And it speaks the language that they speak, knows the people that they know. So venture capital on both sides of the table is not inclusive or diverse. But unfortunately, this is often seen as the default way that we build businesses, particularly tech businesses. Companies that are innovative, that are tech-driven, that solve a problem are not all in massive markets. I mean, obviously they're not. And the venture capital approach isn't relevant to them. If you're only investing in massive businesses from a small subset of companies and founders, you are overlooking whole markets and whole types of founders, whole sets of problems and solutions that could make great businesses. Now, I'm sure more than a few people are thinking, why is she talking about venture capital? You know, chance would be a fine thing, but we don't get that in Scotland. It's hard enough to raise. And that's absolutely part of the problem, because the culture of VC is already here. It's already in the way we do and we think about entrepreneurship, in the jargon and the expectations, the whole mythos of Silicon Valley, but not necessarily the money. It's in the way that we build ecosystems. And it starts by communities or cities or countries asking, how can we be entrepreneurial and innovative? And then totally without irony, they say, how can we be the next Silicon whatever? And that is the opposite of innovative. If you're copying something, that is derivative. And it copies the problems of the valley that we've seen as well. And it's in the way that we talk to founders, the way that they're expected to speak the language and know the jargon and embrace the set of assumptions about the way businesses are built. And it's in the way that angels invest, the way that they gatekeep and what they look for. It's in the expectation that founders will be able to raise a friends and family fund to get their idea off the ground. Well, that's just not an option for so many people. And it's in the way that we advise businesses. It's like a tick box exercise. As soon as you touch the ecosystem and you're a founder and you say tech, then you're sent off in this direction and you pick this legal structure and do this type of funding all the way to that type of exit. But if you say you want to do social good, you get sent off in the social enterprise direction and have different legal structures and a different set of difficulties in fundraising. And if either of those don't work for you, then, well, good luck with the bootstrapping. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with any of those options, with venture capital or social enterprise or bootstrapping. The problem is the lack of other choices, because it's a false dilemma. There should be more options than being big or being good. Because innovation doesn't stop at startups. We constantly demand a stream of new ideas from entrepreneurs in how to work and play and communicate and learn and travel. But we need to demand innovation in the way that we put these ideas into the world. We need to demand innovation from the lawyers and the bankers and the investors and accountants and the advisors. So this is where Zebra comes in. And the zebra is our new animal icon for a different type of thinking, different ways to build businesses, new paths through entrepreneurship. So why a zebra? Well, a zebra is real, unlike a unicorn. Real businesses have real business models, a sustainable way to survive and not just a hyped up valuation. A zebra is both black and white, which is to say balancing profit and purpose, understanding that businesses are there to serve and to help us with the problems that we face, not necessarily create new problems. And zebras survive and thrive together in a group, not one on its own. And that's about not necessarily forcing all ideas to grow to a monopoly or die, but a plurality of companies that can exist together, growing to the right size for their market and given the right investment to grow. So how might we realize this vision? Well, we can ask the question, what happens if we structure and fund businesses differently? What happens if we consciously design an ecosystem to provide support to a range of different kinds, different sizes of businesses? Can we serve different types of founder, and can we reach underserved markets? Can we save the planet? Can we heal divisions in society and tackle inequality? And can we do this in Scotland? I'm certainly not the only one who thinks that the unicorn focus is not the right direction. But still, you see all this talk of collaborating and taking on the valley, it sounds a bit fluffy, right? So what is actually happening out in the real world? What examples can we see of folks doing things differently? And I want to give you now a few examples of 3 different elements of company building that we can approach differently, and by doing so produce different outcomes. And those 3 things are investment, ownership, and exit. So in investment, for early stage startups, there's not much choice, as we've said. Banks don't lend to in the early stage because you don't have collateral, you don't have security, and probably also don't have much revenue to start off with as well to repay. Crowdfunding has been an amazing revelation in investment, but again, it's very hard to do successfully. It tends to work better for consumer products where the people are investing can see the thing that they're buying. But can we build different investment instruments that don't require a huge market or a huge exit, but do enable entrepreneurs to build good things? Well, at Zebras, we're certainly building on that, and starting with this new taxonomy of capital, which is about seeing capital instruments as a spectrum rather than one single choice. And you can see it goes from grants on one side to equity on the other, and goes by risk at the bottom. And I want to talk about some of those things in the middle, which we don't necessarily see very often, but which could be really, really useful in helping us to build businesses. So I'm going to talk about 2 funds that have started in America, which unfortunately we haven't seen in the UK yet because we're a bit behind the curve. The first one is IndieVC. Now this is their webpage, and it's got a burning unicorn on it, so you can tell their position on the issue. And what Indie VC does is it essentially uses a convertible note that optimizes for two different outcomes. So usually a convertible note is a way for an investor to invest in a company without having to put a valuation on that company because it's too early. And then, so it starts off as debt and then it will convert to equity when they do a priced round. But the way Indie VC approaches it is to also look at what happens if they just want to take the debt. So if you take the investment and you decide you're riding a rocket ship all the way to Planet Unicorn, then Indie's investment will convert to equity, and they'll be like any other investor as you take successive rounds and grow really fast. But if, on the other hand, when you've taken the investment, you think this is a sustainable business, it's going to keep going through our cash flow, and we want to build it on our own terms, then the investment will be repaid through a percentage of your revenue as you grow. And what this does is it preserves your optionality as a founder. You don't have to put yourself on a path that you can't get off just by taking investment. And I also want to talk about earnest capital, which is kind of similar, except that it does what it's called it calls a shared earnings agreement. It kind of treats the investor like another founder. So they agree a founder earnings cap, so what you pay yourself as a founder in terms of salary or dividends will have a cap which will keep you alive while you build the business. But then as soon as you want to pay yourself more than that, the investor also starts to get repaid as well from percentage of your profits. And again, this is all about preserving your optionality as a founder, because they also take an equity basis. So you can repay it through your profit, or you can take further investment. So they prioritize profit and sustainability. You don't have to take any other rounds. You preserve your options as a founder while you're building your business and figuring out what it really is. And you can repay the debt to regain your equity, which is your most valuable asset. And so even though you're paying out while you're building your business, and you have to return, say, 3 times their money, you are regaining your most valuable asset, which is your equity, and you can sell it again if down the road that you want to. And you can also build on your own terms. Now, there's no, as I said, UK-based alternative to these currently, although Indie will invest if you start a US entity called a Delaware C Corp. Earnests say that they invest in most of the EU. I don't think there's a UK investment yet, but you can absolutely try. Something else you can do is that both of the terms for these instruments are open source. You can go to these websites, download these terms, and present them to a friendly investor if you have one, and say, you know, how about it? What do you think of this? And I'm going to warn you now, the reason we haven't seen these in the UK yet is partly because it doesn't work with EIS, the Enterprise Investment Scheme, which most angel investor types will use because it gives them 30 to 50% of their investment back on their next tax bill. So that is obviously quite an incentive for them to invest in equity, but it doesn't work with these instruments. But you can absolutely make an argument that they are more likely to get a full return from a structured repayment, as these have, rather than waiting for an exit that may never come. So those are certainly some interesting options, and Zebras Unite itself is working on how we can roll these out to companies around the world. So watch this space. Next one thing I want to talk about is ownership. So this is unfound.coop, if you want to go and have a look. And Unfound asked the question, what if Uber was owned by the drivers? Or what if Spotify was owned by the artists? And not just Beyonce and Taylor Swift, but emerging artists as well. In the current economic game that we play, the only way to win is to be a shareholder. So how do we make more winners? Typically in startups, only a few early or senior employees will get stock options. Most people never actually get to capture the value that they create. But with a cooperative, you can do that. You can share the value. of a startup. Unfound is an accelerator for digital cooperatives, which helps them to start and scale and democratize the process of being a startup. Our co-ops aren't weird or new, and they're absolutely applicable to the modern economy. You probably shop at the co-op, or buy your milk from Arla, or buy your pants from John Lewis, or you have a mortgage from Nationwide, or a pension at Royal London. Now, all of these are in different ways collectively owned, but they're still run like any large modern business. And this can work for startups. So if you're thinking about something, a way to share your startup with the people that you're working with, then Unfound could be a great option for you. And the last thing I want to talk about is exits. So an exit in startup land, as we've discussed, is usually an acquisition by a larger company or an IPO, which is a sale to the public markets. An exit isn't necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes founders want to move on to their next adventure. But in either case, you're handing your precious baby to the accountants. And there's no telling how much of what you were trying to achieve will survive that. But if you've built something that you love, why not sell it to other people that love it? And this is another exercise in collective ownership, and it's from Nathan Schneider at the University of Colorado. And it offers the opportunity to achieve an exit with the mission or the philosophy of the business intact. And so this is another really interesting one that Zebras Unite are working on as well with Nathan Schneider. So yeah, keep your eyes on this one. I think it could provide a really, really interesting option for a lot of startups who've really created something they want to preserve. So, as I said, there's a whole global movement of folks who are working on these problems and solutions and supporting each other to do so. If you saw the CodeBase in Edinburgh talk in January with Natalie Novick, you'll have heard her say that there is only one ecosystem, which we're all in together, which I fully agree with. We don't need to reproduce the same idea in different places and compete with each other. We can collaborate across the world to get our good ideas out there. And here are some beautiful zebras on this slide. I don't know if anybody knows Rob Gelb from Hay Summit, but he's over there on the bottom left. This is from the first zebra conference that was in the US. All these beautiful people turned up to talk about how do we do this and how does it work. So if you want to get involved, if you want to hear more, here's some options. We've got a webinar on Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock with Astrid Schultz, who's one of the co-founders of Venture Capital, talking about what Zebras Unite is actually building right now that will build the capital and the community and the culture to support businesses of different types. You can also join our community, which is now online. We used to do Zebras Unite monthly meetups in Edinburgh, but obviously we can't do that at the moment, so everything has moved online. We've joined this homegrown community platform called the Community Lab, so please do join us there if you're interested. And you can also visit the website and read more about Zebras Unite. Read the manifesto, which is called Zebras Fix What You See Unicorns Break, and you can read that at zebrasunite.com. And you can also find me or other zebras ranting about this stuff on Twitter at those tags below.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daisy. A virtual round of applause for that. That was really interesting, and I think it's probably something that people don't really think about, because I think unicorns are probably more publicized than zebras. But yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. Yeah, if anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the Q&A in the chat below. We'll get round to them. So no questions is a silly question, right, Daisy?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely, ask away.
Yes. So yeah, we'll be here for the next kind of like wee while until we finish up at 11. So yeah, feel free to ask any old question that you like, take advantage of having Daisy here now. So yeah, there was one thing that I kind of noticed during the presentation is, you know, the term unicorn was coined by this guy, but, you know, who coined the name zebra? Like, who was it that kind of came up with this idea of having a zebra be representative of this type of company?
So there were 4 founders of the idea of the zebras, and the founders of the movement called Zebras Unite. And it started with 2 women called Jen Brandel and Mada Zepeda. And they were talking, they both had purposeful startups, but that didn't fit the VC model, and were kind of incredibly frustrated because they wanted to grow, wanted to get investment, but couldn't find investment that fit what they wanted to do. And so they started writing these articles, which is what kicked off the whole movement in the community. And they didn't actually realize until several years later that zebra is like a contraction of their names, Zepeda and Brandel, zebra, which is quite neat, really. But yeah, and there's been lots of other suggestions of different animals that you could describe startups as, like camels and gazelles and oxen and all sorts of things. But I think it's really just the ethos behind this as a movement is what drives it, that venture capital should not be the default option for how we build startups. That's just silly.
Yeah, I really like that kind of analogy that you gave earlier about zebras being black and white, having like both sides, and it being quite representative of kind of that startup community, which I think I really like. But that's really interesting to hear that it was women that kind of coined that term and kind of brought it to life. That's really interesting.
Definitely, yeah, and it is oftentimes women and people of color and people from deprived backgrounds that are excluded from these conversations, that don't know how to speak this language. And that's how whole, ideas get excluded from this process and things don't get built. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I think at the moment there's a big, massive conversation about that kind of diversity and inclusivity at the moment. So it's really great to see kind of zebras kind of leading the way and championing that, just from the outset, like without this kind of everything that's been going on. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. There's obviously a lot of conversation about this now, but we've been out there, doing this work, and we're still doing it. We're ready to, actually get some action going. They're starting a zebra co-op in the US, which is part of what we're going to talk about on Thursday, and setting up an investment vehicle. So, this stuff is actually happening, which is going to bring more founders into the fold and get their ideas going.
That's really great. It's really great to hear. But yeah, if anyone wants to take down a really quick note of the link for the event next week, but I'll also send it out in the post webinar email as well. We've got a question coming in from James. Hello, James. He says, "Hi Daisy, great presentation, thank you. Which companies do you think are great role models at the moment of this type of approach to business?"
It's a good question.
Really good question.
And I think there's a lot of these companies are quite small at the moment because they can't find investment. I think if we want to look to big companies, Patagonia, I think, is obviously a big one. Managing to build a massive company despite being resolutely anti-capitalist is quite something, and they have managed to achieve some real good. They also have their own sort of venture fund within Patagonia called Tinshed Ventures, which is itself investing in new ways of doing things. So I think that's really beautiful. In Scotland, we've got a few companies that identify as zebras, which I think is really great. So WeSeeds, which is an app for preschoolers' meditation and mindfulness, is really lovely. And they obviously are focused on how do we do good by being tech enabled, not necessarily driven by here's how we do tech, but what can we do with that? How can we reach children and make their lives better? Matter of Focus is also a really good one. Sarah and Elsa have been zebras from the start, and they're building ways to measure and manage impacts and how you focus on that through a platform. And so they're really looking to grow as well. another one of my faves. And I'm trying to think of more sort of big ones. I think one of the interesting things is that the founder of Meetup, when Meetup was being shed by WeWork as it sort of imploded, really got involved in a conversation about exit to community, because what he had wanted to build with Meetup was just a way for people to meet and to have positive interactions. And then it being acquired by WeWork, which didn't have the same aims necessarily, kind of contorted it. And so he really wanted to see if Meetup could be exited to a community of people who are actually using it rather than an investor. It didn't go that way, but I thought that was a really interesting conversation.
Cool. Hope that's answered your question, James. If not, feel free to pop another one in. I can see Michaela's kind of added some links and stuff to this event on Thursday, so if anyone wants to grab it as well, feel free. We've got another question coming from Hugo. Hello, Hugo. He says, it sounds like the EIS government scheme is a roadblock in encouraging VC to come to the UK. Is there lobbying and new alternative being presented to propose this change?
I would say it is a roadblock. Lobbying for change is on my list, but I've not quite got there yet. And EIS is one of those things that came out of the how do we build the new silicon, whatever kind of a conversation. It does absolutely incentivize angels to invest over the long term, which sounds great, and it does work for a lot of companies, doesn't work for others. So I think that's probably one of the things we're going to be discussing on Thursday as well, the fact that we do have these roadblocks like EIS, and maybe we should start lobbying. I mean, the social investment tax relief is currently undergoing lobbying right now, which is essentially the same sort of thing, but for social enterprises. And that has been in place for a while now, but will automatically come to an end if it's not renewed. So I think we can probably take some lessons from how that goes in how we might lobby to change the rules and enable more types of businesses to get investment by incentivizing it through tax.
Hope that's answered your question, Hugo. Feel free to follow Daisy on her social media, maybe get some updates when you do a little bit more reading on. Yeah, for sure. Cool. So yeah, any more questions, feel free to pop them in. There was something really interesting that you actually said earlier about unicorns creating kind of like a bad workplace, or they've got like the kind of way that they work internally. Like why is that? Is it just because they kind of naturally have to like grow quite big quite quickly, or?
Yeah, I mean, if your focus is only on growing very big very quick, then things like culture tend to fall by the wayside. And I think workplace culture is certainly something that if you don't embed good values early and make that a focus, then you will absolutely lose it. And they do turn into quite big sort of stories when this comes out. Like there's a big story about Away and about how the founders have been treating their employees, and fairly frequently you get conversations about the big unicorns union busting and preventing collective bargaining amongst their employees. You also get a lot of talk about discrimination and sexual harassment in these places. And that is absolutely because the focus is not on those values, on making it a good place to work. And everybody's under enormous pressure trying to grow and to grow quickly. So if it's not your priority to have a good workplace and to treat your people well, then it won't happen.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people probably have this kind of idealistic way of thinking about big companies being like, oh, it'd be a great place to work, but inherently it's kind of, they've just grown too big and they've not solidified that kind of working culture, which I think is really important. Especially startup as well.
I have to say, of all the places that I worked, even just briefly, a lot of the big corporate places look so shiny on the outside, and you get in and it's just as chaotic as anywhere else you might have worked. It just looks much shinier.
Yeah, exactly. They kind of painted it up and come
Mm.
across as offering bean bags as chairs and free coffee and things like that. Kind of gets sucked
Yeah.
into that initial grab.
Yeah,
Cool.
I've seen people
And yeah.
suggesting, sorry?
Oh no, carry
I've
on.
seen people suggesting that since everybody's been working from home for so long now, they might start to see through all of that stuff. They don't necessarily need ping pong tables and bean bags to create a good workplace.
Yeah.
Actually having control over what they do all day and not being watched to see how long they stay in their seat is a much better way to work.
Yeah, I definitely think this whole working from home has kind of opened up another can of worms for employers to kind of talk about that. And you're right, as much as free coffee and ping pong tables kind of seems like a really good idea, it's like, is that really what employees want to be able to do their work quite effectively? So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
I have to say,
If anyone has
if I didn't have a decent coffee maker at home, I'm not sure this whole working from home thing would have worked out. One thing.
Yeah, we I actually don't really drink that much coffee. I think I bought a pack of coffee for the first time yesterday, and I was just like, I don't even remember what coffee tastes like. It's the danger of not having coffee for such a long time. But yeah, if anyone has any more questions, again, feel free to leave them below. And we'll get round to them. There was something else that you kind of talked about, a couple of zebras that have kind of made it big, but what is your kind of favorite one that's out there that have kind of nailed it and done kind of the whole thing really well?
In terms of nailing, I think this is a really difficult question because the companies you hear about are necessarily the big companies. And I think that's what we're fighting against. Not everything has to be massive. My idea of a company that is doing really well is one that has that great workplace culture and is growing on their own terms and is growing to the right size and is serving their customers. So, I mean, I think there are a couple of startups in Scotland right now that are growing really well and are doing so with the ethos. I know that Goodloop are very aligned with the Zebra ethos, and I love what they're doing. Amicus as well have also very engaged in the conversation and been interested in how Zebras might work. And I think, again, they clearly have a great culture and are keen to do some good. So I think those are my Scottish examples, and I think it's important to talk about it at that level, not just to say let's look at our Facebooks and Googles and Amazons, but let's focus on what's happening right now and who we can support here, whilst having that global focus of how can we talk across the world to build up all these companies the right way, to the right size for them.
What's your for a company that's just starting up that kind of has ambitions of being a unicorn, dead set on it, got their eyes on the prize? What would you kind of like say, advice or anything that you'd say to them to kind of convince them to kind of go down the zebra path rather than the unicorn path?
Yeah, I would like to clarify, the message is not VC is bad, unicorns are bad. That is not what this is about. If you are looking at this and are thinking, yeah, I'm going after a huge market, I'm going to disrupt it and take a big chunk of it, and you probably need venture capital to get this going, then absolutely you should go and do that. Then that probably is the right thing for you. The problem is when people try and fit themselves into that mold, think, well, how can I apply this idea that I have to a massive market? Which is not the right way to think. You shouldn't be trying to fit yourself to the funding. But if you have an idea that does fit the funding and that is that niche, then absolutely go and get it. And you've never really had a better time, given that everybody's online right now. And if your ambition for your company is global, so should your fundraising ambition be. Like, don't stay in your own backyard. Go talk to London VCs, go talk to European VCs, go to the Valley, and you can absolutely do that right now. Get on VC Twitter and get known and start pitching, because we do, as much as we need other funding options to build different kinds of businesses, we also need to get venture capital out of just the same types of companies built by the same types of people. That needs to be a lot more diverse. And so different types of founders and companies need to be pitching these people and saying, you know, here is this market, here's why it's an important one, and here's what we're going to do. But also will say, definitely understand venture fund maths before you do that. Like, go read Venture Deals by Brad Feld, or take the course. Elizabeth Yin from Hustle Fund recently did a great video on how fund maths works. So you definitely need to understand that and things like dilution before you go down that path.
That's a really great advice. So thank you so much for that. But yeah, I think it's I think what you said about kind of diversity is kind of really important, because I think when startups kind of start, they kind of see the, I guess, a cookie cutter way of kind of doing it, and maybe they don't feel like they fit in, so therefore they don't go ahead with their idea or even like start it, because they feel like they just kind of don't fit that mold. So it's really interesting to hear that kind of Zebras kind of promote that diversity and kind of show everyone that everyone's got great ideas and everyone can do it. So yeah, that's really great to hear.
Absolutely, that is the essence of the message. You know, there's not just one way to build a company. There isn't only one size of company. We need different ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because I think you see a lot of kind of like the Ubers and the Facebooks of the world. So it's always great to see kind of like a bit more diversity and a bit more inclusivity as well. I guess is really important. So I guess that's kind of what the community lab is kind of about, isn't it? About kind of joining the community. Could you tell us a little bit more about kind of what goes on in there, kind of what conversations are happening?
Yeah, so for us, the community lab is a place where we are going to, I like to think of it as building a library, and not just of resources like articles and podcasts and books on how to build different types of company, but of our connections to each other and of our experiences and our insights. So each month we're going to open up a new space in our community, the community lab, and explore a topic in depth. So we'll have discussions and webinars and gather all the resources on that topic, and then it will always be there. That topic will always be there for us to refer back to. So if you think, I need to think about hiring and values in my company, I remember that we talked about that. You can always go back and consult that. Or if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of alternative funding options, then we're going to have a space on that as well. This month, because we're just kicking it off, it's all about the Zebras movement itself. So our event on Thursday will be in there. We'll connect the recording so people can always go back and look at that. And we'll have all the articles about Zebras. So if anybody joins the community, they can always go to that space to learn about Zebras, about what the movement's all about.
Oh, yeah, awesome. Yeah, again, we'll send all the links and things after. Or if Michaela's been doing quite well on adding those links into the chat,
Yeah,
so you can grab.
I should just say that the community lab itself, as I said, it's a homegrown Scottish startup, very Zebra themselves. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm so close to it. I should have mentioned, yeah, totally one of my favorite Zebra companies is the community lab, because they're really engaged in how do we build a company that, or a platform that encourages positive communities and positive interactions. And it's not just about a massive Facebook-like thing. It's about how do we do good for people, which is just amazing.
That's really awesome to hear. Cool. Yeah, if we'll wait a couple more minutes for any questions, but I guess we can kind of wrap up if there aren't any more questions. But I guess thank you so much, Daisy, for joining us today. That was really interesting, and I hope everyone got a lot out of that. Just a quick reminder, we have another CodeBase on the Couch next Monday. It's with Smart Hopewell Creative Thinking. So maybe you could link some creative thinking in with some Zebra thinking, would be really cool. But if you miss this or would like to watch it again, then this will be uploaded onto YouTube kind of tomorrow, and we'll make sure that everyone kind of gets the link for that. So yeah, if everyone's kind of all out of questions, again, we'll say another massive thank you to Daisy. Thank you so much, Daisy, for joining us today. And
yeah, an absolute honor. Thank you.
It's been lovely, and it's been really lovely to hear about kind of zebras in the community, especially in Scotland, which you kind of don't really hear much about. So it's really great to kind of get this out there for people to kind of hear about and know about and kind of get involved in the community and things like that. So yeah, thank you so much. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I guess we'll just finish up for today. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.